crazy neighbor tried to steal our home. She faces karma when her own actions cause her to be billed $200,000. Before diving into the main story, let's take a moment to introduce the key players. Our entitled neighbor will be referred to as N from this point forward, and their spoiled son will go by S. Another person worth mentioning is the previous owner of our house, who we'll call PO, though their role in the story is fairly limited. One important detail to keep in mind as you read. From the time we purchased our home until the present day, nearly 15 years have passed. Unless otherwise stated, you can safely assume that a significant amount of time separates most of the events that took place. Now, let's set the stage properly and build up to the main events. To do that, I first need to provide some background. Much of what I'm about to explain happened before we bought and moved into this house. At one point, and owned a massive stretch of land situated along a road that led to a well-known recreational lake in our area. When I say along the road, I don't mean it was right next to the water. It was actually a fair distance away. However, the road N lived on was the only access route to several lakefront properties, upscale resorts, and the most popular boat dock on this side of the lake. While not every property in this area was outrageously expensive, there were certainly some high-end estates just down the road, with wealthy people driving through regularly. This detail will come into play later. Being quite well off and owning a considerable amount of land, and eventually divided their property into 4 roughly equal sections as their children reached adulthood. One of these sections went to N's daughter, who, surprisingly, turned out to be a decent person despite the rest of her family's behavior. Another section was given to S, and even had houses built on both of these properties, more or less tailored to their children's preferences. As for the 4th portion, the one where N didn't live, she decided to construct a small convenience store. That detail will also become important later. Now, I'm not entirely sure of the reasoning behind this, but possibly to prevent future inheritance disputes, N gave her children the official deeds to their respective properties. You can probably guess where this is going. While the daughter turned out to be fairly responsible, S, well, let's just say responsible was the last word anyone would use to describe him. He was a full-blown party addict, and every single person in the neighborhood despised him. Nearly every night, he threw wild, obnoxiously loud parties that stretched into the early hours, making it impossible for neighbors to get any sleep. The police had to set up a regular patrol nearby because they were getting called on him so frequently. And to make matters worse, his mother paid for absolutely everything: electricity, water, garbage collection, you name it, it was all in her name, and the bills went straight to her mailbox. Well, all except one. Since the property was legally in his name, so was the property tax. Instead of handling it like a responsible adult, S ignored it completely and never gave the money to N. Either N assumed he was taking care of it, or she simply didn't think about it at all. So it wasn't exactly a shock when the police eventually showed up at his house. What was surprising, though, was that S never came back, and soon after, his house went up for auction. By this point, the place was a disaster zone. There were gaping holes in the drywall, and a massive opening in the living room floor led straight down into the garage basement below. The kitchen floor and even the subfloor underneath had to be entirely replaced. Nearly every wall was smeared with mud. Thanks to S's reckless partying and total lack of responsibility, the house had deteriorated to a state that the banks officially deemed unlivable. Because of that, the only buyers who could even consider purchasing the house were those who could pay in cash. That's when P.O. entered the picture. P.O. was a house flipper, but not one of those wealthy investors you see on TV. He was more of a hobbyist, an older, retired guy who flipped houses to keep himself active and busy. His method was simple. He'd buy a rundown house at an auction for next to nothing, fix it up with his own 2 hands, and then put it back on the market. While working on one property, he lived off the profit from his previous flip. By the time he finished renovations and bought the next house, his savings would be nearly depleted, with whatever remained tucked away in a modest emergency fund. At the time, we were on the hunt for a new home, but our budget was tight. We couldn't afford anything too expensive. On our budget, we couldn't afford anything too extravagant, but when we stumbled upon this listing, it seemed like a dream come true. The house was the perfect size, nestled in an ideal neighborhood, and even situated down the road from the lake, a place we love spending time fishing and boating. It checked all the boxes. The only catch: the price wasn't listed yet, which made us a little nervous. But there was no harm in taking a look. One afternoon, we decided to drive by and see the place for ourselves. As we pulled up, we noticed P.O. hard at work on the house. We stopped to say hello and inquired about the price. P.O. explained that he was still in the process of fixing it up and hadn't officially put it on the market yet. His realtor had simply listed it on the website for efficiency when the time came. We ended up chatting with him for a while, just being friendly, and he seemed to appreciate the company. Eventually, we made our pitch. We were interested in buying the house as it was and finishing the renovations ourselves. We explained that we were looking for a forever home, and this place felt like it could be the one. Unfortunately, P.O. declined. He mentioned that he had already received several offers and didn't feel comfortable selling it to us in its current state. If we were still interested, once the renovations were complete, we could buy it at full price. We thanked him for his time and left our number in case he ever changed his mind. Less than 2 weeks later, we got a call from P.O. completely out of the blue. He explained that his sister had fallen ill in another state, and he needed to leave immediately to be with her. That meant he wouldn't have the time or patience to finish the house. If we could figure out a way to buy it as it was, he'd be happy to sell it to us for a reasonable price. We jumped at the opportunity and started looking for financing. Thankfully, a realtor friend of ours had a few bank connections and helped us secure a loan. There was a catch, though. Since the house wasn't up to code, the bank gave us just 2 weeks to bring it up to standard. If we failed, they could default the loan and auction off the house. We explained the situation to P.O., and while he was in a rush and couldn't stay to help, he did something incredible. He gave us a detailed rundown of everything that needed to be done to meet the bare minimum code requirements. He estimated the time, labor, and costs, making it much easier for us to plan. And then he went a step further. We took out a loan for double what he was asking for the house, and after closing, P.O. gave half of it back to us. That extra money went straight into repairs. Thanks to his prior renovations, the house was already close to passing inspection, but just in case, we called in a few friends and got to work. In record time, we managed to meet the code requirements and secure our home. But there was still plenty left to fix: floors that needed replacing, wiring that had to be redone, and wallpaper that was literally decomposing and stuck directly to the drywall. It took months of hard work, but finally, our dream home was livable. There were still a few things left to update over time, but we were finally ready to move in. We weren't even done unpacking when it showed up on our doorstep. P.O. had warned us about her entitled attitude multiple times while we were dealing with him, but we hadn't given it much thought. At first, she seemed perfectly nice, friendly, even. We had no idea why P.O. had been so adamant about watching out for her. Then, just as we were wrapping up our conversation, she dropped a bombshell. In the most polite and compassionate tone, she informed us that the house wasn't actually ours. According to her, we had been scammed. P.O. had no legal right to sell the property, and we had exactly 30 days to move out. We had heard horror stories about fraudulent home sales before, and for a moment, sheer panic set in. Had we really been tricked? Had we poured all of our time, money, and effort into a home that wasn't even ours? And assured us that she felt sorry for us, that it was a terrible misunderstanding, but there was no getting around it. The house belonged to her. And now, we had to leave. That neighborhood respected him and saw him as a fair guy, but right now, he wasn't being fair at all. He was standing in our driveway, waving a gun around, telling us to pack up and leave. We stayed calm, though our hearts were pounding. I stepped forward, keeping my hands visible, and told him straight up that we legally owned the house. I explained that we had bought it fair and square, had checked the records, and had put our own money and sweat into fixing it up. I even offered to show him the deed, but he wasn't interested. He said he didn't need to see any papers because he already knew the truth, and had told him that we scammed her out of her family home, that we were squatters, and that we needed to leave before things got real bad for us. At this point, I was furious, but I knew better than to escalate things with a guy holding a gun. I told him that if he really wanted to play hero, he should check the facts before making threats. My spouse, who had been silently gripping their phone, then spoke up and said, "The police are on their way." That got his attention. He muttered something under his breath, lowered the gun, and got back in his truck. As he drove off, he shouted that we hadn't heard the last of this. The police showed up a little while later, and we told them everything. Unfortunately, since he hadn't actually shot or harmed us, there wasn't much they could do beyond filing a report. They did go have a talk with him, though, and after that, we didn't see him again. But it wasn't done. She started harassing us directly, banging on our door at all hours, screaming at us from the street, and even trying to block our driveway with her car. We called the police every time, and eventually, they warned her that if she kept it up, she'd be arrested for harassment and trespassing. That's when things escalated in a different way. One night, we woke up to the sound of glass shattering. Someone had thrown a brick through our front window. Attached to it was a note: "Get out while you still can." That was the last straw. We installed security cameras, reinforced the doors and windows, and made sure to document every incident. We also got in touch with a lawyer who told us we could get a restraining order if things didn't stop. The funny thing is, after all of this, and actually tried to play the victim, she went around telling neighbors that we were the ones harassing her, that we were bullies who had stolen her home and were now ruining the neighborhood. But here's where karma finally caught up with her. Turns out, one of the neighbors she had been gossiping to was a retired cop. He didn't buy her story for a second. In fact, he knew all about how she had lost the house, because he had been at the original auction when it was sold off. He started telling everyone the real story. That Ann's son was the one who had lost the house due to his own stupidity, that she had plenty of chances to buy it back, but refused, and that we were the ones who had actually saved and restored the house, turning it into a home again. Once word got out, the harassment died down. The peacekeeper neighbor never bothered us again, and, realizing she had no support left, finally stopped showing up at her doorstep. A few months later, she actually put her own house up for sale and moved away. As for us, we're still here, still in our dream home, and after everything we went through, it feels even more like ours than ever before that really took the gossip all that seriously. Still, it was enough to put a little doubt in some people's minds, especially the ones who didn't know us personally. But the real trouble started when she began targeting our reputation directly, not just with rumors, but with something much worse. See, after the whole house situation, it seemed like she realized that no amount of crying or begging was going to get her property back. And after we shut down her laughable offers, she must have decided that if she couldn't have it, she'd make sure we regretted buying it. It started small. Someone left a bunch of trash in our yard one morning. Beer cans, fast food wrappers, and cigarette butts. We thought maybe some drunk had just wandered by and dumped it there, but it happened again and again. It was never a lot, just enough to be annoying. Then, we started noticing that some of our mail was missing, and we even caught a glimpse of someone running away from our mailbox late at night. We put up cameras after that, but whoever was messing with us must have known because they avoided getting caught. A few neighbors warned us that someone had been talking about how we stole the house and how it wasn't right for us to be living there. One guy even told us that there were whispers about making things difficult for us until we gave up and left. But the real kicker? One day, we woke up to find our driveway completely blocked. Someone had dumped a truckload of gravel and dirt right in front of it. We couldn't even get our car out. We had to call a favor from a guy we knew with a tractor just to clear a path. At that point, we knew this wasn't just some minor neighborhood squabble anymore. This was an actual attempt to drive us out. And we weren't about to let that happen without ever really thinking much about it. But now that we knew, it was a different story. We weren't about to let her just claim a third of our land, as if it had always been hers, especially not after everything else she had done. At first, we tried to be civil. We showed her the deed and the property map, calmly explaining that the land she had been using, her shed, her garden, all of it, was actually ours. We weren't even asking her to move anything right away. We just wanted to let her know that when we put up the fence, it was going on our property, not hers. But she wasn't having it. She exploded. She called us liars, thieves, and just about every name in the book. She swore up and down that the land was hers, that she had always used it, and that we were just trying to steal it from her. She even tried to claim that the property lines must have been drawn wrong, that they had to be mistaken, because there was no way she had been using someone else's land all these years. We didn't argue with her. We just let her rant and storm around while we made our own plans. At the end of the day, the paperwork was on our side, and we knew there was nothing she could do to change that. So we went ahead and hired a surveyor to come out and mark the exact property lines. And let me tell you, watching In's face as those little orange stakes started going into the ground, priceless. In must have realized that things weren't going her way because she decided to take matters into her own hands. One morning, we woke up to find that a brand new set of surveyor stakes had appeared, except this time, they were placed exactly where In wanted them, not where they were supposed to be. The problem? We hadn't hired a surveyor yet. We had been planning to do it, of course, but it was still on our to-do list. So, to wake up and find stakes marking property lines that weren't even close to accurate was a shock. At first, we thought maybe she had actually hired a real, licensed surveyor, but after a little digging and talking with a few neighbors, we found out that wasn't the case at all, and had somehow convinced a friend of hers, who wasn't even licensed, to come out and fix the property lines in her favor. We still don't know exactly how she managed to get him to do it, but we later found out that the guy wasn't a surveyor at all. He was just some random dude who worked as a handyman. He had no training, no certification, and no business putting up stakes or messing around with property lines. We were honestly shocked by the audacity. It must have thought we were idiots who wouldn't check, because the whole thing was so sloppy it was laughable. The stakes didn't even match the original property records, and her so-called surveyor hadn't submitted any official paperwork to the county. There was no proof of anything being done, let alone any legal standing. It was all a complete mess. The stakes weren't even the correct color or material. Everything about it screamed sham. We could have ignored it. We could have just let it go and assumed it would fade away. But at this point, Anne had already pushed us way too far. She had lied, stolen from us, and now she was trying to rewrite reality itself. She was basically trying to remap the property and make it all hers, all without any legal backing. So we did what any reasonable, fed-up people would do. We called the county office and reported it. We explained the situation, provided evidence of the real property lines, and made sure they understood exactly what In was trying to pull. This wasn't just some little mistake on her part. It was an outright attempt to take what wasn't hers, and we weren't going to let that slide. And that's when things really started getting interesting. The county office took the matter seriously and sent someone out to inspect the stakes and confirm the property lines. They quickly realized that In had no right to make those changes, and not only did they remove the fraudulent survey stakes, but they also issued a warning to her. Of course, In didn't take kindly to this. She had her pride, and she wasn't going to back down. So, she doubled down and started spreading all sorts of rumors around the neighborhood, trying to make it look like we were the ones causing trouble. She even told a few people that we were trying to steal her property and that we were just being greedy. But at this point, no one was buying it anymore. In's reputation had already been tarnished with the store incident, and now, people were starting to see her for what she really was, someone who would stop at nothing to get her way, even if it meant making up lies and twisting the truth. The more In pushed, the more people started to distance themselves from her. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion, and we weren't the only ones who saw it coming. The rest of the neighborhood started to rally behind us. They could see what she was doing, and they didn't like it one bit. And the best part? It wasn't over yet. Things were about to get even messier, and we weren't going to let In get away with anything else they could escape the consequences of their actions. At this point, we were feeling cautiously optimistic, though we knew that things could still go wrong. The insurance company was taking their sweet time to investigate, but the weight of the surveyor's mistake was hanging over their heads. If they acknowledged that the surveyor had made a mistake, or worse, had been bribed, it would be a massive issue for them, and for In. I could only imagine how uncomfortable In must have been at this point. She had been so confident in her manipulation of the property lines, so sure that she was going to win, and now she was staring down the barrel of a legal mess that could cost her far more than she had bargained for. I honestly didn't care if she was nervous. This was the result of her own actions. So we waited, and waited, and waited some more. It felt like we were on a roller coaster that hadn't quite finished its climb to the top yet. The insurance company's investigation was dragging on, and we weren't sure how long it would take to get any answers. The whole situation was exhausting, and the worst part was that it didn't seem to be backing down. Every time we turned around, she was trying to push her agenda, offering subtle threats or hinting at things that made it clear she wasn't done yet. But then, about a week after the deadline for payment, we received a letter from the insurance company. This time, it wasn't a demand for money, it was an apology. Apparently, after further investigation, they had reviewed the surveyor's report and found a significant discrepancy between the property lines on their records and the actual measurements taken by the legitimate surveyor. The tree, which had caused so much damage, was indeed on our property, though, as we had argued from the start, the surveyor who had originally drawn up the boundaries had been wrong. The insurance company also stated that they would no longer pursue us for payment, as the fault rested squarely with the incorrect survey results and the actions of N and her hired surveyor. The situation had become a serious legal issue for N, and I knew this was the beginning of the end for her manipulative schemes. The letter also included a note about potential legal actions against the surveyor who had made the mistake, especially if bribery was involved. It wasn't going to get off easy. It felt like a massive weight had been lifted off our shoulders. Finally, it seemed like the law was going to work in our favor. I was starting to feel like we could actually make progress here. But that didn't mean N was just going to give up. No, I knew she was already plotting her next move, but now I was ready for whatever she tried to throw at us next. I just didn't expect it to happen so soon. Well, the saga of N was definitely far from over, but it seemed like we were starting to win, bit by bit. As for the surveyor, I could tell that he'd been paid handsomely for his role in all of this. He probably had enough to cover any potential consequences and would likely have to leave the country soon. So there was no chance he'd change his story for the insurance company. We were in the clear, but the frustration of the whole ordeal was still fresh. We called the insurance company again to follow up, and the agent we spoke to seemed pretty satisfied with the situation. They couldn't reveal too many details because of confidentiality, but they did mention that, much like us, the claim had been disputed by Anne, but this time, her version of events didn't hold up. The surveyor had confirmed the property lines to the insurance company, and since we weren't disputing those results, the responsibility for the damages caused by the fallen tree was now on Anne. That was a relief, to say the least. At this point, the ball was firmly in her court. We knew Anne wasn't happy with us, but honestly, that was the least of our concerns. She could complain all she wanted. She had gotten away with too much already, and now she was in for a rude awakening. As for paying the insurance company, we didn't have much of a problem with it, though I'm sure N wasn't thrilled. We weren't sure how much money N had saved up, but it seemed like enough to cover the bill without selling off more of her land. And though we hadn't completely resolved the land dispute, we were still considering saving up for a legitimate surveyor. At this point, it was more about the principle of it than the actual land. Since then, we've kept quiet about it. We've noticed that N gives us a very unhappy look whenever she sees us, but honestly, I'm not sure what she expected. She had literally stolen from everyone in the neighborhood, and now her reputation was tarnished. No one trusted her anymore, and it seemed like people were more than happy to watch her downfall. N was stuck, trapped by her own greed and manipulation, and we were just sitting back, waiting to see how it all played out. But just when I thought we were done with her, there was one more little twist to the story. We had been considering putting up a privacy fence. Nothing extravagant, just something to keep our yard a little more private and secure. But instead of immediately getting a full fence, we decided to try out an invisible dog fence for our dogs. For those who aren't familiar, it's an underground wire that emits a beep when the dog gets too close, followed by a mild shock if they keep going. We didn't love the idea of shock collars, but we had been convinced to give it a try since it wasn't harmful. The shock was mild, just enough to be a little uncomfortable but not painful. We ran the wire well into our property to keep our dogs away from N's land, mostly because we didn't want them wandering over to where she was trying to steal our property. Little did we know, that was about to be our biggest mistake, at least for N. She must have thought we were marking out where we planned to put the fence or something, because one day, she ran over the wire with her lawnmower. And not just any lawnmower. She used an electric one. We all learned that day that electrical lawnmowers don't mix well with electrified wires. Her mower was absolutely ruined. Every electrical component inside it was fried. She had to buy a brand new mower just because she couldn't resist being petty and running over the wire. The best part? She had no way to blame us, because the wire was well beyond the property line she claimed as her own. She did try to spread some rumors, but they didn't gain any traction. Everyone knew it would have been ridiculous to blame us for what happened, so no one paid any attention to her. And of course, she didn't ask us to replace her mower. She didn't even try to make a scene about it. I think she knew how we'd respond, probably with some laughter and a good luck before we walked away. So now we're just sitting back, watching In dig herself into a hole she'll never get out of. It's honestly kind of fun at this point, knowing that she's stuck and there's nothing she can do to get out of the mess she's made for herself. Oh, and as a little bonus, just for fun, I've got another story coming up soon. It's about how my mother's malicious compliance ended up costing her company over $100 million and got her entire department shut down for good. But that's a tale for another night. I'll be sharing that one soon, so keep an eye out for it.